Hello, and welcome to the Backwoods Boogeyman Podcast. I'm your host, Jeb, and tonight we'll be talking about the not deer. So let's get into it, shall we? What is the image that comes to mind when you picture a deer? A quaint, gentle woodland creature, beautiful, graceful, agile, and sleek, more than likely. Most of us who see deer on a daily basis witness nothing more than fleeting glimpses of upturned white tails fleeing from our headlights, picturesque scenes of the calming creatures grazing in a field. Not something scary, right? Surely not something predatory, right? But what is more unsettling than when an animal that you have always known and presumed to be harmless turns and looks at you with an eerie intelligence in its forward-facing eyes, seeing you as a prey item? The not deer, as it has come to be called, with help in part from Reddit forums, creepypastas, and podcasts like Tony Merkel's The Confessionals, appears to be a rather new occurrence, booming in popularity around 2019 and 2020, sometimes called deer, D-E-O-R, from an old Germanic term meaning beast. The not deer combines the unsettling intelligence and cunning of a predator such as a big cat and the almost unnatural speed and silence of a deer into one horrifying package, and worse yet, an unassuming one. These creatures don't appear to be anything more than a simple white-tailed deer upon first glance, and many witnesses to these insidious ungulates only describe realizing something was wrong by the time that the behooved horror was coming toward them, in that trademark janky movement that they are known for, and gives rise to their other alternative name of spider deer. The first accounts of the not deer seem to have originated in Appalachia, particularly in South Carolina, with some from the area arguing that they had grown up with the terrifying tales of the spider deer passed down for generations, and the creatures have always been around and are just recently entering their heyday, just as the Bigfoot craze of the 1970s. But since their explosion in internet popularity, people have been seeing not deer everywhere from Maine to California, and with alarming increase. Often described as something very closely resembling a typical deer, but oftentimes larger, and with a head not of a herbivore but that of a predator, complete with a mouthful of wretched, snaggled, out-of-place teeth that have no business in the mouth of a deer. They show no fear of humans, in fact quite the opposite, tending to approach people in a rambling, sickly gait, seemingly dead set on whatever sinister schemes they have in mind for their unaware victim. Is this nothing more than paranoia of an internet-created boogeyman? Perhaps, but what if it isn't? What if there is something more to these perverse ruminants, something unknown, something waiting patiently in the tranquil serenity of the forest, something waiting for you? So let's go up to the open plains of the Northwest, with an account from Lon Strickler's website, Phantoms and Monsters. The story is as follows. This occurred in July of 2021 around 2 to 3 in the morning, but I remember it like it just happened. I've always believed in the paranormal and have had a couple of experiences over the years. What sets this one apart, though, is the fact that it was witnessed by another person who was a non-believer before this. We were driving along Highway 212 in a rural area somewhere between Bella Froche, South Dakota, and Hammond, Montana. We were going to a musical festival in northwestern Montana from Kentucky. My cousin was driving, I was in the passenger seat. 2 others were in the back, and we'd been taking shifts driving so that we didn't have to stay at a hotel and could drive straight through. My cousin and I were on night shift due to the nature of our profession, which kept us awake at odd hours. We had been passing the time by BSing, listening to music, and looking at the local wildlife as we drove through. We had seen a lot of pronghorns and nice deer earlier in the day. Both of us being outdoorsmen, we were pointing out every game animal we caught in the faintest glimpse of. We were on a particularly barren stretch of the road and hadn't seen a man-made light for miles. No other cars on the road, no houses, nothing. We were reveling in the novelty of it, as we didn't have stuff like this back at home. I was the first one to point out the deer that was just coming into view of the headlights. As we approached, there was something clearly off about the animal. My cousin says, "Man, that's a weird-looking deer." The animal was turned broadside to us, standing on the right side of the road, facing the highway. It had its nose to the ground like it was foraging. The coat was an odd grayish-white, which was odd, as deer tend to stay more red throughout the summer. There was obvious flesh hanging from the antlers. This was odd because the antlers were fully formed. Deer in July should still be in velvet, which means their antlers are still growing. They were also light-colored, with no sign that they had recently been rubbed. As we got closer, I could start to see there were patches of fur missing, not mange. There were sores, open wounds, ranging from a tennis ball to dinner plate size. The bones of the deer were also visible through the skin. It looked like an embodiment of a term paleontologists use called shrink wrapping. And that's about the time that I noticed how disproportionate it was. The front legs were too short, the back legs were too long, and the knees bent out to the sides, not backward. The spine was twisted and stuck up at random intervals down the length of the back. The neck was far too long to be on a buck. And then there was the snout. It wasn't built like an ungulate snout. It was stocky, rigid, and angular. It looked extremely predatory. It was as if you'd taken the deer skin and stretched it over a wolf's skull. As the front tire became even with the deer's head, it looked up. It had strange eyes. I don't know how exactly to explain them. They were deep brown, nearly red. They were clouded, but hollow. Its tongue hung from the side of its half-open mouth. There were visible pointed teeth, but they were not canine. Deer don't have top teeth in the front, but this one did. It looked like someone had just grabbed a random handful of teeth from a jar and glued them into this thing. Not just deer teeth, but a jar full of teeth from random animals. Time slowed down. I felt my heart beat in my ears. My hands and ears got hot, and I gripped the door panel. It locked eyes with me. I've never been so sure I was going to die in my entire life. It maintained eye contact and followed me as we passed. My cousin said, in a manner of concern I've never heard from him, "Did you see that?" To which I replied, "Yep." He said, "Are we going to talk about it?" I said, "Nope." And we sat in silence. The air was thick. I could hear him breathing heavily over the other two who were snoring in the back. He was gripping the steering wheel with both hands. I turned up the radio and we just sat. We went until the next streetlight before we said anything to each other. We agreed not to discuss it until we were back from our trip. We took an alternate route home to see some things we couldn't hit on the way up there. But I had a feeling neither one of us wanted to go back that way anyway. We've talked about it a couple of times since then. Some people don't believe me when I tell them. Most people, though, can tell when I'm not making it up. I don't look for opportunities to talk about it. If the conversation is right, though, I'm more than willing to share. I get knots in my stomach just thinking about it sometimes. I know what chronic wasting disease looks like. I know what sick deer look like. I know what deer have been hit by cars look like. I don't know what this was. I don't know if anyone has an idea of what this might have been, or maybe had a similar experience. H. And so that is pretty much the textbook not deer. You know, it's got the messed up back, it's all arched up and weird looking. It's got the missing fur. It's too big, its legs aren't on right. Neck's too long, it's got that weird head. Like he said, it looked like somebody stretched the face of a deer or the skull of a wolf. which is pretty common with the description of these things. So, that little complete nightmare fuel monster there, that's typically what you hear of. But let's head on over to North Carolina for our next and possibly more disturbing encounter. I grew up in North Carolina, and we always had deer on our property, and deer hunting was incredibly common in my town. I definitely know people who had experiences with the not deer, or the deer, as they're sometimes called, that being DEOR. I've heard it all. It was like a human. It had arms. It walked like a person, and there was something wrong about its face. But by far the creepiest ones are the ones you can't tell what's wrong until you can't see it anymore. The most common comment that I've heard is, it looked at me in the eyes and I just knew that it wasn't a deer. I got scared and I ran, and after I got back to the path, I realized that all its limbs or its head, was on backwards. I've seen people come tearing out of the woods, hyperventilating plenty of times, but I've only had one experience personally. I was looking for Holly with my brother, but he ran back to the path to grab a bucket because his hands were full, and I was alone. There was a deer, maybe 15 to 20 feet away. I squatted down and got quiet because I thought it was a baby deer, and I wanted to watch it. But then it stood up and I knew something was wrong. I may have never been so scared in my life. My brother came running back and he saw it too, for just a second before it ran off. Then it hit me. That deer I saw had way too many eyes, and its legs were just a little bit too long, and maybe bent backwards. I recently moved to Bridgewater, Massachusetts, which has its own set of wild cryptids, but the deer don't seem to be a thing here. MM. Now this encounter, as a regular listener to the Erie Cast Network, reminds me of a Redwood Bureau episode from February 15th of 2022 called Stagus, in which a man finds himself being stalked by a herd of freakish, rotting zombie deer, having their actions controlled by hordes of tiny, mind-pirating corpse beetles who burrow forth from the animals' faces with their sets of teeny, peering human eyes that take on the color of their last victim. But being that the Redwood Bureau podcast is horror fiction, I'm sure that charming little sidetrack has nothing whatsoever to do with this encounter. Now this next encounter hits a little close for me, because I believe this probably isn't too far north from where I live, so let's get into it. I was young when I saw it, probably around 10 years old. I remember it, and I shouldn't be able to. Most of my family lives in St. Louis. My grandfather liked to take us bowling. He used to take this shortcut. I don't really know if it was a shortcut or if there was a road he didn't like, or, like my other grandfather, he doesn't like to drive over bridges. Either way, we took a route that led us by a wooded area. If you know the Midwest, the farther from town you get, the more it is either untamed land or farmland. This was untamed land, tall woods and a clearing near the road. In that clearing there was a group of deer. Not unusual. We normally saw deer that way, and my brother and I liked looking at them. One of the deer, a buck, was stood out away from the rest, a little closer to the road, a little farther from the rest. Luckily, there was a distance between us and the clearing, covered by some tall grass, and so these deer were about 40 to 50 feet away from us. That deer was looking straight at her car, moving its head as we drove by so it could keep watching us. Deer have monocular vision, eyes on the other side of their head for a wider field of view. So they look at things from the side. A deer with its nose pointed perpendicular to you is looking at you. That deer was facing us. That deer was tracking us. That deer had forward-facing eyes. That deer was a predator. That deer was not a deer. That is all I remember, and I shouldn't remember it at all. BP. So that's a little freaky, ain't it? You're just driving by, looking, oh, look at the pretty deer. And then all of a sudden this big weird looking one just starts staring at you and you realize its eyes are pointing forward. And it's pretty freaky. Now let's head to another northern Midwest encounter here. Well, I guess it'd just be Midwest, but whatever. I live in the Midwest, but go to college up north in South Dakota area. One night, I'd visited the ER for some pain, and was there until almost 2 in the morning. On my drive back, I pulled over to the side of the 2-lane highway, almost in the grass, because I was falling asleep at the wheel and needed a minute to wake up. The area I went to school in was really rural, and I'd driven about 18 to 20 miles to get to the ER in the first place. So I'm sitting in the pitch-black highway about 10 miles from my dorm when a deer crosses in front of my car. There was woods on one side of the highway and farmland on the other, so I figured it was just going to get something to eat. A couple of other deer crossed, about 5 of them, my headlights being the only thing that even showed me what they were. As I'm letting them pass, I noticed that one of them had legs in the back that looked broken. It made me think, poor deer, before my sleep haze cleared and I remembered that an animal with broken legs couldn't walk. I looked closer and noticed that its gait was off, walking in jerky motions. It more looked like it was hopping than walking. The other deer weren't spooked though, so I figured I shouldn't be, until it finally passed by and I could see its body. The neck was too long, the ears were too long, the legs looked inverted or bowed almost. Whatever it was not a deer. When the little group finally crossed, I got back into the highway and raced off, every nerve in my body telling me that I just saw something I shouldn't have. I got to my dorm in a record time and basically ran across campus, feeling like I'd escaped death. I never told anyone about that. I figured since it was late and I was on painkillers and very tired, that maybe I'd imagined it, but still, every time I see a real deer, my body freezes, thinking about what I might have seen that night. That one, it could just be CWD, could be chronic wasting disease. As they get real skinny, they start acting funny. It might be why its, legs were weird, and it looked like it had a long neck and long ears and everything, because it doesn't have any more fat on it. They're real gaunt. But it may not have been, and it was creepy, so I included it. And now for our last encounter of the night. My friend and I were driving home on the highway at 2 a.m. last Thursday, July 22nd, 2021. Earlier in the night, my 2 other friends threw out a disclaimer regarding the reckless deer that love to hit your car rather than you hitting them. And I know exactly what he's talking about. You're driving along, all of a sudden, bam, deer right across the hood of your car. No warning. But Anyway, we were driving behind a tractor-trailer after just hitting red light, and as we were approaching the cornfield to our left, 50 yards, there were these glowing eyes, so I said to my friend, I bet that deer is about to jump out into the road. All I'd seen at first glance was 2 glowing eyes, and as I'm looking at this thing, I realize that this unknown creature is about as tall as the corn. My friend says, that's not an effing deer. We instantly freaked out as we drove by, but seriously, I feel like I could faintly see a head, like a very small head with huge glowing eyes that were so close together. My headlights caught the reflection of the eyes as soon as the truck in front of us proceeded enough to view the cornfield. Legitimately, there's not a single animal/human that could be a possible explanation. I never knew about these cryptid things until my friend that night exclaimed, that was a not deer. I didn't know what that thing was. This was in central Pennsylvania, specifically Lebanon, Pennsylvania. TP. I just realized reading this that this was probably a Bigfoot, and I shouldn't have included in this. The taller than the corn, looking at you. That's typical Bigfoot type behavior. I shouldn't have put this in here. I probably should have read it before I threw it into this episode. But hey, we'll pretend it was a not deer standing on its hind legs and not just a Sasquatch. But what are not deer? A species of natural predator that either through coincidence, mimicry, or convergent evolution has come to share an eerily similar visage to that of a simple herd animal. Maybe a deer that has in one way or another become possessed by some sort of parasite that has taken control over the creature's body in order to perform whatever insidious acts it intends. Or maybe these are on some level human, a shapeshifter sloughing skins and taking on the, if rather misshapen, form of a speedy herbivore. Will we ever know? Perhaps not, but one thing is certain. These unexplained horrors are being seen more and more often and closer to the places that we call home. So, next time you leave for work early or you're driving home late and a deer sprints into the road in front of you and comes to a halt as you hit your brakes, ask yourself this: are you completely sure you know what that is looking back at you? And that, my friends, is the not deer. All those encounters were from Phantoms and Monsters, Lon Strickler. An excellent resource. Highly recommended. But to, what these things are, it's weird, right? Like I said in my little summary at the end here, it could be some kind of natural predator. It could have, grown to look like a deer so it can get closer to, whoever it hunts. Maybe people. I don't know. There's stupid people around here that hand feed the damn things. I mean, if anybody was going to get eaten by a not deer, it would probably be them. Oh, Bambi, come over here. Come eat the grain out of my hand, Bambi. And then it comes rambling up and grabs her hand and bites it off. Oh no, the deer's killing me. And it drags him off into the woods and nobody ever sees him again. I'm just saying, it would be fitting. But then maybe it's something that's taken over the body of a deer. Like I mentioned, the Eerie Cast Network. Old Darkness Prevails over there. What's his real name? Brendan Dean or something like that. I remember listening to an episode. I should have tried to find it and listen to it again. But this was at least a year ago. Where it was some guy that said he was camping in the Ozarks somewhere. And he saw a deer, walk in front of his tent. And then it walked past his tent again, and then it walked up and stood there right outside the door. He said it felt like it was staring at him and started making these noises and retching its head around, just typical terrifying not deer things that they do. And then he said it made this wet, splat sound and collapsed on the ground. And he said he laid there, not wanting to move because he didn't know what the hell was going on. And then all of a sudden he hears something going, sneaking underneath the floor of his tent. And he said, he turned on his flashlight and was looking around, and there's this big wet glob that was apparently escaping the corpse, crawling underneath the floor of his tent. And I remember making a little note of that somewhere, and I called it the Ozark deerworm. I'd like to pretend I discovered that. Mr. Cryptozoologist Jeb, hypothetical new species here, the Ozark deerworm. Of course, that story could have been fake. It could have nothing to do with this. It could have been something else completely. I believe, if I remember right, he said that when he got up the next morning, it was gone. The corpse was gone. There wasn't anything under his tent, nothing. And, like I said, don't know if that has anything whatsoever to do with this, but thought it was worth a mention. Then we have the shapeshifter side of the coin here. And I'm not going to say the name that you want me to say because I don't want one to break into my house at night and eat my face while I'm sleeping. But shapeshifters, flesh vessels, what's the other one that's really nasty nickname for them? I can't remember, what was it, flesh pedestrians? I don't know. There's some nickname, so you don't have to say the real name. And somehow it's even creepier than the real name. But anyway, I believe Navajo, anyway. I'm no expert in this, don't get mad at me, because I'm going to screw it up. But I think for them it was mainly bear, coyote. I think they used elk, too. So I guess deer wouldn't be out of the question. Because, again, I'm not an expert. But the different animals have different symbolisms, like the coyote's the trickster, the bear is strength and resilience, and elk is valiance and honor or something like that, I don't really remember. But I know you see people say, wow, if it ain't on Navajo land, it ain't a shifter. I don't know why you would say that, really. As far as I know, there's nothing that binds them to, old family land or something like that. I'm not even sure if you have to be, have Navajo or some kind of native blood to do these rituals, because you're just summoning a spirit and then, letting it inhabit you and having control over it, from what I understand. So, you do enough of these nasty, dark rituals, just really awful crap I won't get into right now. I will do an episode on them eventually. But you do enough of these rituals and things, you get that spirit's attention, and you let it, inhabit your body when you don the pelt of whatever animal it is that you intend to take the form of. And then as you walk, you slowly begin to take the form of that animal, and the skin of the animal binds with your own, and you become, a coyote or a bear or an elk or whatever. And they say that the eyes are always what sets them apart. You can always tell a shifter by the eyes. It'll always have human eyes, or it'll have yellow eyes, or whatever the case is. I've heard a couple different versions of that. But you can always see when you look at them that isn't an animal you're looking at, And of course, that's with these things. It's always the eyes. The eyes are forward-facing. They don't look right. There's some of them that they say look like cat's eyes. It's just really strange. I'm not sure if I've found any that they say it look like human eyes, but I'll have to do some more research into that. Maybe when I do my shifter episode, I'll throw some of them in there. But anyway, but I think that about does it. So before we wrap it up here, I'm going to give a little update for the podcast. I'm going to record a couple episodes here and release them. So if you're listening, you got a little backlog instead of just one episode a week. And then I'm going to try to release one every Sunday. And if you like the podcast, or hell, even if you don't, like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and I'll read it on the show. Hey, hit the bell, ring the monkey, smack the baby, whatever you got to do to make this the #1 show on the internet. And I want to cite my sources. All the encounters tonight were from Lon Strickler's Phantoms and Monsters. And give a special thanks to Alexander Nakarada's song Banjo Fever for the intro and outro, and Arthur Vinke for the background music. That was his song Overgrown Farmstead. And as we depart from each other's company tonight, remember this: don't feed deer, because you never know when what they're interested in eating isn't the grain you've got in your hand, but you, yourself. Not at all. Bye. which has its own set of wild cryptids. Hyperventilating. The first accounts of the knot deer seem to have originated in Appalachia, particularly. God, I can't speak.